content warning. This video discusses sexual exploitation, violence, and references to human remains. If those topics are difficult for you, consider watching later. The crazy truth behind ancient Rome's most infamous nightclubs. That phrase sounds modern on purpose. It grabs you. But what I want to show is that behind the catchy label, nightclubs, lies something far more brutal and far less glamorous. A sprawling, state-tolerated market in human lives. Call them lupanares, call them brothels, call them whatever helps you picture them. The reality is a system that intersected economics, law, and power in ways Rome rarely advertised. If you want more deep dives into the darker corners of history, subscribe now. So what were these places? The word lupanar usually translates simply as brothel. In Rome, they were legal, regulated to varying degrees, and ubiquitous. They ranged from small, grim rooms above a bakery to lavish houses with painted walls and musicians. Legally, a registered sex worker took on a public stigma. Registration could strip a woman of certain rights, and owners of these establishments occupied an odd place in society, publicly despised, privately necessary. Archaeology and surviving inscriptions give us the layout. A ground floor for public exchange and selection, often with an open frontage or corridors where clients could pick, and small upper cells or cubicles where encounters took place. In wealthier houses, the walls were frescoed, the furnishings meant to create an illusion of luxury. In the cheap places, the cells were windowless, smelly, and built for turnover, not comfort. That contrast matters because it reveals a two-track economy. On one side were elite courtesans, women who could sing, play instruments, converse, and command prices that funded lifestyles. On the other side were enslaved women and the poorest free women, whose work was reduced to a volume game, low price, high turnover. Records, legal texts, and later moralizing authors point to a shocking calculus. In the cheapest lupanaries, encounters could be priced at almost trivial sums. Sources speak of the 2 asses rate, an amount that in contemporary terms could be compared to the cost of a loaf of bread. On those terms, owners relied on speed and numbers. Some ancient commentators and modern scholars estimate that a woman in a low-end house might see dozens of clients in a single day. Figures like 20 to 30 are cited in the sources. That number should be handled carefully. It's plausible in certain contexts and attested in some ancient descriptions, but it is not a precise statistic across the empire. Still, the implication is clear. Where you see such turnover, you see systems optimized for extraction. And extraction is the right word. These places were businesses. Owners, sometimes freedmen or middlemen acting for absent investors, profited. They paid taxes, or at least they were supposed to. Roman authorities taxed prostitution at various times. Some ancient accounts even suggest the revenues were noteworthy to the city's coffers. Estimates that prostitution provided a substantial share of municipal income exist in older scholarship and in provocative summaries, but modern historians urge caution. Records are partial, and the fiscal picture is complex. Even so, the basic structural fact remains. The state took money from this trade, and elites, senators, generals, wealthy equestrians were clients and often indirectly investors. That creates a moral contradiction. Those who publicly upheld Roman virtue were routinely patrons of a business that profited from social vulnerability. To make this system human again, I want to introduce a case study. Drusilla, whose story is a composite reconstruction based on several ancient testimonies and modern scholarship, represents the many young women trapped by the market. Recorded details vary, and historians debate particulars. But what the sources agree on is the arc. She was enslaved, considered of an age that contemporaries would have called young. Some accounts use a teen figure, which must be treated as a historical atrocity, not an eroticized fact. Her owner prepared her for sale, and she was forced into daily work that wore her down physically and socially. Imagine being registered, marked by a legal status that limited your future choices, and then expected to perform under conditions designed for turnover. Sanitation was poor in the cheap houses. Disease, abuse, and exhaustion were common outcomes. If a woman survived the immediate toll, freedom did not guarantee dignity. Freed women often returned to the margins, stigmatized, with limited options, and vulnerable to re-enslavement or further exploitation. If this sounds like a purely economic tragedy, note that it also had a culture of luxury layered atop it. At the top end, courtesans could command immense sums and wield cultural capital. They were taught music, poetry, and manners, and they mingled with men of influence. Portraiture and references in literature treat some of these women as almost celebrity figures. The same elite who dined with them could, in public, speak against moral decay. That hypocrisy reached dramatic proportions when private behaviors intersected with public scandal. One such scandal involved Hispala Phaisania, often rendered in Roman sources as Hispala Phaisania, who appears in the ancient narrative as a whistleblower. Her testimony, recorded in Livy and cited by later commentators, accused certain bacchanalian cult gatherings of ritualized abuses and alleged sexually coercive practices tied to elite networks. Historians caution that Livy and other sources shaped the story to serve a political project, the Senate's suppression of the Bacchanalia in 186 BCE, so the details should be read with an eye to agenda. Still, the basic sequence is powerful. A woman came forward named names, and the Senate reacted with a broad crackdown that included the restriction of private cult assemblies and penalties for participants. For Hispala, the state's response included reward and protection, at least in the narrative. The episode reveals how rare accountability could be when it threatened elite networks. It also shows that public purges often served political consolidation as much as moral correction. Beneath the more documented structures lie the darkest, most contested claims. Ancient moralists and some legal texts refer to secondary slave markets where unprofitable women, those who could no longer work, who were diseased or too old, were resold, abandoned, or in extreme allegations, treated in ways that would horrify modern readers. Archaeology has unearthed cemeteries and skeletons that indicate violent deaths, injury, and neglect in urban contexts, and some burial practices have raised questions about social marginalization. Separately, a handful of ancient writers allege that remains were used in superstitious rituals or sold for ritual purposes. These are the claims that demand the most caution. Archaeological interpretation can suggest patterns of violence or marginal disposal, but tying a particular grave to a ritual trade is speculative in many cases. Likewise, literary accusations of organ sale or ritual ingestion often come from moralizing authors with axes to grind. Scholars debate these claims vigorously. Some find kernels of truth in recurring motifs, others warn against reading sensational modern narratives into fragmentary evidence. My position here is to present these as serious allegations, supported in part by textual testimony and in part by archaeological anomalies, but not as settled fact. How did the state and society respond to the most brazen abuses? Punishment, when it came, was uneven. The law could be harsh in principle, but enforcement hinged on status and politics. Owners who crossed powerful clients or who threatened social order could be targeted. And sometimes exposure came from within. Whistleblowers like Hispala or freedmen with grudges could trigger investigations. Yet the same system that enabled exploitation, tax revenue, investment, elite demand, made systemic reform difficult. Reform, when it happened, often reflected shifting moral fashions as much as humanitarian concern. Religion played a part in that shift. As Christianity gained imperial favor and then dominance in the 4th century, public attitudes toward prostitution changed. Christian emperors, beginning with Constantine and moving through later rulers, enacted laws that aimed to regulate or restrict prostitution and to elevate sexual morality in public discourse. That did not make the trade vanish. Instead, it pushed much of it into darker, more clandestine spaces. Where regulation receded, shadow markets and informal arrangements flourished. The industry's decline was gradual and uneven across the empire, and vestiges of the old system persisted for centuries. So why call these places nightclubs in the title at all? Because the analogy is useful rhetorically. Both are venues where adults gather after dark for pleasure and commerce, where staging and atmosphere matter, and where lines between public entertainment and private transaction blur. But it is an anachronism, if taken literally. Lupanares were commercialized sites with legal and economic roles in ancient cities. They were not discos. The comparison functions to provoke curiosity, to draw attention to the social dynamics at play, and to make modern viewers consider how nightlife and commerce can mask deeper inequities. The crazy truth, then, is not that Romans were uniquely depraved. It is that a complex system, economic incentives, public tolerance, elite hypocrisy, and legal tolerance created a persistent market that commodified people, left vulnerable individuals with few protections, and produced both opulence and horror side by side. That duality is what history often hides behind grand monuments and triumphant narratives. The ledger entries, the tax rolls, the legal registers that quietly tell a parallel story of profit and dispossession. If this shocks you, ask this one question. How much of our own public morality is insulated by private behavior? History offers uncomfortable mirrors. The more we understand the structures that made exploitation possible in Rome, the demand, the investment, the legal toleration, the more we can see the modern echoes of systems that commodify people today. If this account raised questions, or you want us to dig into another hidden corner of history, let me know in the comments. If you found this illuminating, hit subscribe for more deep historical investigations. Keep the discussion respectful. These are difficult topics, and the people behind the stories deserve dignity in how we discuss them.